diving into a pretty compelling account today from the material we've both been looking at.
Yeah.
Genesis 47, the story of Joseph, his father Jacob, and that huge famine in Egypt.
And the famine's a big part of this story, isn't it? It really sets the stage.
Yeah.
You know, we've got Jacob and his whole family. They're fleeing famine back in Canaan.
Right.
They're coming to Egypt for refuge. And as you know, Joseph, Jacob's son, he's got this incredibly powerful position.
Oh, yeah.
Second only to Pharaoh, which is just an amazing setup.
Yeah. Okay, so let's jump into the text.
Right.
The passage opens with Joseph telling Pharaoh that his family has arrived. He even picks 5 of his brothers to present to Pharaoh, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Oh, why is that?
Well, why not bring the whole crew, all at once?
I see what you mean. It's a good point.
Yeah.
It seems like a strategic move on Joseph's part.
Right.
You know, if you look closely at the text, he's probably trying to avoid overwhelming Pharaoh
Yeah.
by just bringing a smaller group first.
Makes sense.
And when Pharaoh asks them what they do, their answer is pretty straightforward.
Right.
They're shepherds, just like their ancestors before them.
Yeah, makes sense.
And this establishes their skills right away, their need for pasture land.
Yeah.
It leads right into their request to settle in Goshen.
Which Pharaoh not only agrees to,
Right.
but actually encourages them to do.
Exactly.
He says, settle in Goshen, it's the best part of the land. And then he tells Joseph something really interesting.
What's up?
He says, if you know any capable men among them, put them in charge of my livestock.
Wow.
It's like Pharaoh sees their potential right from the start.
He really does. He's not just offering charity here.
Right.
He sees these guys as valuable assets,
Yeah.
especially with the famine going on. You need experienced people to manage livestock.
Of course.
And it also shows how much Pharaoh trusts Joseph's judgment
Right.
to pick the right people for the job.
Exactly. And then we have this really significant meeting between Jacob and Pharaoh.
Oh yeah, this is a big moment.
They're brought together by Joseph.
Right.
And the first thing Jacob does is bless Pharaoh.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right? It wasn't the other way around.
I see what you mean.
Which I thought was a subtle but kind of important detail.
Yeah. What do you think it means?
Well, I don't know, but a blessing from someone like Jacob,
Yeah.
an elder patriarch,
Absolutely.
it must have carried a lot of weight back then.
You're right. It wasn't just a casual hello.
Right.
In that culture, those blessings, people believed they had real power.
Wow.
Like they could actually bring good fortune.
That's fascinating.
Then Pharaoh asks Jacob straight up, how old are you?
And Jacob's answer is so powerful.
What does he say?
He says he's 130 years old and that his life has been difficult compared to his ancestors.
Wow.
You can almost hear the weight of his experiences in those words.
Yeah, you really can. It's like a reflection on all the hardships he's gone through,
Yeah.
all the challenges in his long life. And then before leaving, he blesses Pharaoh again,
He does.
which really emphasizes the importance of that blessing.
Right.
It shows their meeting was more than just a ruler and someone asking for help.
Yeah, definitely. So after that, Joseph, he does exactly what Pharaoh told him to do.
What's that?
He settles his family in the district of Ramesses, gives them property,
Okay.
and importantly, he makes sure they all have enough food.
Right.
Everyone in his father's household, according to how many people they have.
He's looking after his own.
He is. He's putting their well-being first in this new land.
Yeah, absolutely. This really sets the stage for the contrast we see later on
Right.
between the Israelites and how well they do,
Yeah.
and the Egyptians who are really struggling during this famine.
So the initial arrival seems okay for Jacob's family. They're settling in. They have what they need.
They're getting by.
But we can't forget about the famine. That's the driving force behind everything.
Absolutely. The text really emphasizes how severe it was.
Yeah.
It says both Egypt and Canaan wasted away because of the famine.
That's scary.
It wasn't just a local problem.
Right.
It was a widespread catastrophe.
Yeah.
People were running out of everything.
And that's where Joseph steps in with these strategic, some might even say drastic actions.
What did he do?
He starts by collecting all the money in Egypt and Canaan
Wow.
in exchange for grain.
So all the wealth is going to Pharaoh, basically.
Yeah, with Joseph managing it all.
That's a huge responsibility.
It is, and what I find really interesting is how systematic his response is.
Yeah.
He's not just giving away food, he's setting up a system.
Right.
A system of exchange.
Of course. And as the famine goes on, the money runs out, right?
Yeah.
So the Egyptians, they're facing starvation.
They are.
And they come to Joseph begging for food. They're desperate.
Right.
They even say, "Why should we die before your very eyes? Our money's gone."
It's a powerful image.
It is. They're at their wits' end.
So with no money left, Joseph moves on to the next phase.
What's that?
Trading food for livestock.
Oh, wow.
And this goes on for a whole year. Horses, sheep, goats, cattle, donkeys.
It's a huge shift in economic power, isn't it?
It is, because back then livestock was essential.
Yeah, their livelihoods depended on it.
It was a major form of wealth.
Right.
And Joseph, acting for Pharaoh, he's essentially taking control of all these vital assets.
In exchange for keeping people alive.
Yeah.
It's a tough situation all around.
It is, but the famine keeps going, and the next year the Egyptians are in even worse shape.
Oh, no.
They have no money, no livestock left.
So what do?
They offer themselves and their land to Pharaoh
Wow.
in exchange for food and seed.
They're literally giving up their freedom to survive
They're giving up everything just to avoid starvation.
and to keep their land from becoming desolate.
Right, and so Joseph, he acquires all the land in Egypt for Pharaoh.
That's a massive change in land ownership.
It is, except for one important exception.
What's that?
The land belonging to the priests.
Why is that?
Because they got a regular allowance from Pharaoh, so they didn't need to sell their land.
Interesting. So they had some level of security even during this crisis.
It seems that way. It shows that even in this widespread disaster,
Yeah.
some groups were better off than others.
Right. And it hints at the power Pharaoh already had
Yeah.
over certain resources.
Exactly. So after acquiring all this land, Joseph takes another big step.
What's that?
He reduces the Egyptian people to servitude.
Wow. So they become tenants on Pharaoh's land.
They do. It's a complete transformation of society.
It is people who used to own their own land.
Yeah.
Now they're bound to it.
Right, and by extension to Pharaoh?
It's a direct result of how Joseph managed the famine.
Yeah, but it's not just about taking things.
No.
He also gives back.
What do you mean?
He gives the people seed to plant crops
Okay.
and sets up a new system where a fifth of the produce goes to Pharaoh.
It's like a tax.
It is, but it's also a way for them to recover.
Makes sense.
The people keep the other 4/5 to eat and for future planting.
It's a pragmatic approach.
It is.
And, it does solidify Pharaoh's power,
Yeah,
but it also gives the Egyptians a chance to rebuild,
right.
to start over.
Exactly. And their response is pretty remarkable.
What do they say?
They thank Joseph for saving their lives and accept their new status under Pharaoh.
They must have been so grateful.
They say, "You have saved our lives. We will be in bondage to Pharaoh."
Wow.
It shows just how desperate they were,
Yeah.
how grateful they were to be alive.
They were willing to give up their freedom for a chance to live.
And this system, this law about giving a fifth of the produce to Pharaoh,
Right.
becomes a permanent thing.
Really?
The text even says it was still in force at the time of writing.
That's incredible. It's like a lasting legacy of what Joseph
Yeah.
did.
It shows how these events really changed Egyptian society.
Yeah. A big part of their agricultural output
Right.
went straight to the ruler.
Okay, so we've been talking about the Egyptians, but what about the Israelites over in Goshen?
Ah, yes. Their experience was quite different.
It was.
The text says they settled in Goshen, acquired property, were fruitful, and increased in number.
Wow. So while the Egyptians were losing their land and freedom,
Yeah,
the Israelites were thriving.
it's a stark contrast.
It is. They're in Egypt, but they seem protected from the worst of it.
Like they're in a bubble, almost.
Yeah, and their special connection to Joseph and Pharaoh's favor,
Right.
it gave them a different experience.
Absolutely. They weren't treated the same as the Egyptians.
And then the story turns to Jacob's final years.
Oh, yes.
He lives in Egypt for another 17 years and dies at the age of 147.
Wow. What a long life.
It is, and as he's nearing death, he makes this really specific request of Joseph.
A dying wish.
Yes, he calls Joseph to him
Okay.
and asks him to swear an oath.
It's serious business.
It is. He wants to be buried back in Canaan with his ancestors.
Not in Egypt.
No, even after all these years in Egypt
Wow.
and all the success his family has had there,
Yeah.
he still wants to go back to his homeland in death.
It shows how important his roots were to him.
They were his identity.
And of course, Joseph promises to do it.
He does. He swears an oath.
And the scene ends with Jacob worshiping, leaning on his staff.
Yeah, it's a quiet, powerful moment.
It is, especially after all the drama of the famine.
It brings the focus back to family and faith.
Yeah, his worship, even when he's so old,
Right.
shows how deeply he believed.
So to wrap up our deep dive today,
Right?
we've seen how Jacob's family was resettled in Goshen,
Yeah.
Thanks to Joseph's position of power,
Right.
we've seen the devastating effects of the famine on Egypt.
Yeah, it completely changed how land was owned and how society was structured.
And all because of how Joseph responded to the crisis.
Right.
And we've seen the contrast between that and the success of the Israelites in Goshen.
It's fascinating how quickly everything changed in Egypt.
It is.
And the fact that the priests were exempt from selling their land,
Yeah.
it really tells you something about how power worked back then.
It does. It makes you think about the long-term consequences of Joseph's actions.
Yeah, he saved the Egyptians from starvation, but
yeah.
he also changed their whole relationship with their land and their ruler.
And then you have this stark difference between the Israelites surviving and prospering while the Egyptians are struggling under this new system.
It raises a lot of questions, doesn't it?
It does. Like, what happened to Egyptian society after all of this?
Yeah, and what does it say about how people adapt and survive during a crisis?
So much to think about.
Definitely, it's something for everyone to ponder. We encourage you to keep exploring this text. Read it, think about it, talk about it. Until next time, happy exploring.